Welcome back to Environmental Ethics. I'm Tom, and this video is on Michael Pollan's An Animal's Place. In this article, Michael Pollan is directly attacking Singer and is arguing for a position that he calls towards the end of the paper humano-carnivorism. So basically, he thinks that there is a humane way to farm and eat meat. Michael Pollan is himself not a philosopher. He's a journalist. He's pretty famous. I think he did the Food Inc. movies and documentaries. So he's invested in kind of the broader picture of food production. So this article is interesting. It's a little bit longer. In it, he's very sympathetic with Singer. He starts off very sympathetic, and he notices that he is opposed to what Singer is saying, but he's not really sure why, and he kind of gives somewhat of a first-person narrative along these lines. But in the beginning of the article, he really considers the idea that, he doesn't have much to argue against Singer with. He notices that Singer says that animals should be treated with a certain degree of equality. He recognizes that Singer is not saying that animals enjoy all the same rights as human beings, but that there is a sense in which animals have interests that ought to be respected, and that they do experience pain and suffering just like human beings, and to that extent they should be afforded a certain degree of rights and freedom. So he recognizes all this, and in reporting his kind of reaction, he considers a couple of common defenses against what Singer has to say. The first one is that, animals kill each other, so why can't we kill animals, And of course, this implies something that we've talked about before, which is that we could take our sense of morality from nature, which means that if animals do something, then it's okay for us to do it. And of course, we think that that's wrong. You can come up with bunches of examples. One is that some animals eat their children, right? We don't think that makes that okay, right? So it's pretty obvious that that's not a good argument. He also considers the idea that freedom might be worse for animals than living on a farm. As it turns out, he's actually going to side with this argument a little bit, but in a different sort of way. But of course, this seems like a problematic argument, because if you were to make such an argument for human being, right, someone being in prison, saying they're better off in prison than being out free because they would do more damage to themselves or something like this, we tend to not think that that's okay, because we think that the person should be given the freedom to do what they want to do. And if they were to decide for themselves that they wanted to, commit themselves because of mental health issues or something like this, then that would be up to them, but that it should not be put upon them. And of course, with animals, they're not making the choice to live in captivity. We are placing them on farms, right? Then he also turns from this to the idea of domesticated animals. And this is one thing to really concern ourselves with, is the nature of domestication, right? Animals that we eat, chickens, cows, so on, are bred that way. They're bred to be domesticated and bred to live on a farm. And so, and this happens for, oftentimes thousands of years. And so these animals are not really built to live in the wild. And one might think that actually changes, kind of the kinds of beings they are, that they're not essentially wild animals, and that should be kind of respected in some way, and this comes up later in the article. But turning our focus to domesticated animals, Pollan brings up this example of polyface farms, right? And polyface farms is I think, an organic small farm, and in that farm, the animals are treated very well. We talk about this nowadays: free-range chickens, grass-fed beef, so on and so forth. And in that farm, he notices that there's a kind of ecosystem that, all the animals kind of have their parts to play, and they're well fed and they're given space, and they seem, for all intents and purposes, happy. And then, of course, at the end of their lifespan, some of them are slaughtered, right? And that is part of kind of the natural order of things. And so he gives this example, and he also brings attention to this author, Scully, that wrote a book on called Dominion. And he argues that human beings are superior to animals, but based on this, that human beings really have a more pronounced moral obligation to take care of animals and to not abuse them and to not use them or overuse them out of some sense of mercy and compassion, because humans do have the moral high ground, so to speak. They should kind of take the high road, so to speak. So this starts to kind of turn the way Pollan wants to go, in the sense that, just because you're farming doesn't mean that you have to do all the horrible things that factory farms do. And then, moreover, he's going to argue that respecting the farm and maintaining farm life is really important for the environment and for these animals and so on. So he brings up a couple of other points that animals oftentimes have very cruel deaths in nature. They are, many of them are prey, and it's not really nice the way that they are killed by other animals. And he also mentions that because these animals are domesticated, many of them, left to their own device, if they were all set free, would actually make themselves extinct fairly quickly. The arguments, for example, deer hunting, are along these lines, that you have to keep the population down of deer because they will overeat and they will basically render their environment unusable for them, and so then they will starve. And so, one could argue, and Pollan does, that letting these domesticated animals go would not necessarily be good for them as species level. It also brings up the issue that Singer's paradigm of consequentialism is really based on individual rights, right? So the idea is that we should let a particular animal free and not infringe on its happiness. Now, in the case of kind of overeating in the population, notice that each particular animal, their kind of happiness is going up, but after a period of time, the entire species kind of goes away, right? And so the individual freedom and the species advancement are at odds with one another. And Singer is really committed to the idea that we need to promote the happiness of individual animals. And so one might think that that's kind of problematic. It definitely runs counter to some species preservation acts, right? Moreover, there is a certain implied analogy in Singer's view, where he's thinking of farms akin to prisons or slavery. Pollan argues that that's not really a proper analogy, and that we really shouldn't be thinking about farms in this way, and that animals are not necessarily looking for some kind of freedom that humans enjoy, and that it's not really a good basis by which we should argue that animals need to be kind of let off these farms or something like this, right? He also notices that even if you are vegetarian or vegan, animals are killed quite frequently in the farming of vegetables. They're stuck in combines, they get displaced, and so on. And so, based on all these things, Pollan really thinks that animals kind of play a particular role, and that they should be farmed humanely. They should not be placed in factory farms, but actually humane farming is going to be kind of the best option for animals and for humans, and that we don't need to eat meat as much as we do. In fact, we would benefit quite a bit from eating less meat and eating kind of organically, locally sourced meat that is humanely farmed, and that this is kind of the better option out of all the options, where he kind of contrasts it with strict vegetarianism, or unknowing or unconscious kind of carnivorism. And he thinks that humano-carnivorism is kind of the middle path that allows us everyone to kind of get what they want, so to speak. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.